actually been a while since I haven't done a proper anatomy video, so I thought that today was the perfect day to talk about this magnificent, beautiful female organ, the uterus. The word uterus comes from Latin uterus, which means matrix, womb, belly. This female reproductive organ par excellence has the amazing task to welcome, host, nourish the embryo and allows menstruations and childbirth. No less. The uterus has a very central position in the reproductive system, and we can compare it to a crossroads or a hub because it lies between the vulva and the vagina inferiorly and the uterine tubes and ovaries laterally. It is located behind the urinary bladder, in front of the rectum, between the ureters that bring the urine from the kidneys to the bladder, under the sigmoid colon and peritoneum, over the pelvic floor, and as for the prostate, everything is packed up and protected inside the lower pelvic cavity. It has the size and shape of a big upside down pear, but in women that already hosted a baby, it can be a little bigger. Now, let's have a look on the inside, shall we? It is made of three main parts: the body, or corpus, if you want to go fancy, the cervix, or neck, and the isthmus, literally the narrow passage between the two. The cervix is the only part of the uterus that we can see and touch through the vagina. And you know when we talk about cervix dilatation before labor? Well, that's him. It literally opens to set the baby free. The lower opening of the cervix is called external ostium of the uterus, and the superior one is called internal ostium of the uterus. Between the two, we find the cervical mucus, which is basically vaginal discharge to simplify. And cool facts, it acts as a spermatozoa filter to only allow the best of the best during fertilization. And finally, we find the uterine cavity within the body, the uterine horns that allow to connect the uterine cavity to the uterine tubes or fallopian tubes, and the fundus, which is the uppermost part of the uterine wall. Speaking of walls, the uterus wall is actually made by 3 layers, and I'm pretty sure you know at least one. The most internal layer is called endometrium, and you may have heard of it from endometriosis. It is made of a functional layer and of a basal layer. Now, if fertilization doesn't happen, and if a baby doesn't go inside it to grow, the functional layer will be destroyed, resulting in a process that you know under the name of menstrual cycle. The middle layer is called myometrium, which literally means uterus muscle. It's basically a smooth muscle that you can control willingly. It will only contract during labor, causing the famous contractions, and during the menstrual cycle, allowing to expel the functional layer of the endometrium and the blood. The bleeding will simply be caused by the tear of the vessels inside the functional layer. And yes, is the culprit for the period cramps. And finally, the outer layer of the uterus is called the perimetrium, which is basically an expansion of the peritoneum, which is the sac that envelopes all the abdominal organs. If you already visited a gynecologist, you may have heard about ante or retroversion and ante or retroflexion. Now, in most women, the uterus lies in anteflexion and anteversion. Anteversion is basically the pompous doctor's term to say that the long axis of the uterus and the long axis of the vagina should be at a 90-degree angle. And anteflexion means that the long axis of the uterus body and the long axis of the cervix should be at a 120-degree angle. These are average medical numbers. But in case of a retroversion, which results in a uterus and vaginal angle above 90 degrees and that affects 1 of every 4 women, it can lead to pain during the sexual intercourse. To ice your knowledge of the uterus cake, I'd like to show you very quickly the ligaments, blood vessels and nerves that allow the uterus to live. The structures that allow to maintain the uterus in place are the paracervix, the uterosacral ligaments, the round ligaments of the uterus, the mesometrium, which is basically the expansion of the peritoneum, and the pelvic floor. The uterus has still the ability to move just a little bit. In fact, a full bladder and rectum will push it a little bit upwards. Arteries and veins have the same path. Uterine vessels come from and drain into the internal iliac vessels, and ovarian vessels come directly from the aorta and drain into the inferior vena cava. And last but not least, uterus nerve supply mainly comes from the sacral nerves, and I insist on the mainly. Well, that's already a lot of information for today. Chinese call the uterus Bao Gong, which literally means the baby's palace, and it symbolizes creativity and even your ability to be a mom. Try to breathe as much as possible with the diaphragm, which will make the uterus move as it should, and please never wash the inside of the vagina because it will literally kill every immune ecosystem that's inside there. I'll soon make some videos on fertilization, menstrual cycle and all, but during the waits, you can click on this one. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon. Bye.